How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiege, live today on the Wednesday, August 21st, on this show to talk about some more NFL storylines to come later on this week, predicting some things and also just talking about the biggest news that we've gotten on today throughout the week. Starting off with Chad Ochocinco mentioning how he expects Ja'Marr Chase to get a contract extension this week. Well, we're already on Wednesday, so, time is ticking if that is to be the case. We're going to talk about what Ochocinco said on that. Plus, in the second segment, adding on CeeDee Lamb and Brandon Aiyuk to the Ja'Marr Chase case, and also predicting how these situations are going to end up and the impacts each of them could make if they decide to hold out or be traded or anything like that. Plus, later on in the show, we're going to go through some of the comments made by Tom Brady on the state of young quarterbacks nowadays, and also what Bill Parcells said on the topic as well. A lot to get through on today's show, so make sure to stick around for those topics, plus much more later on. But before we get started, I'd like to remind you guys, if you guys have any questions, comments, or opinions you'd like to share during the show, please make sure to do so. We thrive on your energy and insight, whether that be question, opinion, or anything you'd have to say. And whether it's a question or anything like that, please be willing to share it. Now, if you want to make sure it's absolutely certain that we get a chance to see your question, comment, or opinion, you are now able to use the Super Chat feature at the bottom of the chat box. Just click on the $ there at the bottom and send in your Super Chat. This way, it guarantees that your message gets on the air, and it's also a great way to support our channel. We rely on your support to keep bringing you the sports content that you love, and we appreciate it every time you guys are able to do that. So go ahead, again, let us know what you're thinking. Hit the Super Chat button and share your opinion, question, or comment. But also, if you do prefer an alternative, you could still use the old tip and donations link, gsmcpodcast.net, to tip, donate, and leave a comment or question there if you prefer. We couldn't do this without your amazing support, and we're so thankful to have you guys as part of our community. And again, it makes the show a lot better if you guys share your opinions, so please go ahead and do that. Use the Super Chat feature in the chat box. But now we are able to start on the first segment, very heavy on the wide receivers to start off. Starting off with one of them, Ja'Marr Chase. And where is his situation going? Where do we stand right now? And is there any indication of when we could potentially see this resolved? Well, last week people were surprised when Ja'Marr Chase missed practice at some point last week. Some believe that, he didn't have to be there because they were going over sort of walking through special teams and things like that. He didn't necessarily have to be there. But others still took it as more serious that, he's not at practice. Is he going to turn this into a holdout situation or anything like that? But, he did come back to practice a few days after that, after their second preseason game, but still not actually practicing, just being there, being present as a hold-in that he continues to go on through this offseason and through training camp. But now, in terms of any development, any sort of breakthrough with this, head coach Zac Taylor still refuses to clear up anything, whether last week's absence especially was excused or unexcused, and still not saying too much overall on the status of Ja'Marr Chase, whether or not he feels that this is being close to being resolved or anything like that. He's staying pretty mute about it, which is a little frustrating. Honestly, if I'm a fan of the Bengals, I would be a little frustrated if the head coach didn't come out and say anything about it. You look at the other situations, Jerry Jones can't stop talking about it. Mike McCarthy has said something, and also Kyle Shanahan, John Lynch have said something. So it kind of rubs me the wrong way that Zac Taylor isn't really updating too much on it, but, that is how he's approaching it, so that is that. But now, as if this needed any more eyeballs, because of all the uncertainty around it, Zac Taylor, like I mentioned, not saying anything, and Ja'Marr Chase also not mentioning too much. This time we got the opinion of legendary Cincinnati Bengals receiver Chad Johnson, or Chad Ochocinco. He talked to Adam Schefter over the weekend about any updates, anything he's hearing from Ja'Marr Chase or from this situation. And Chad Ochocinco said Ja'Marr's deal will get done probably sometime this week. definitely before the season starts. Absolutely. And Adam Schefter asked him, how does he know? And Chad Johnson said, I just know. So take that as you will. Take that with however big a grain of salt that you need to. But I feel like, especially from at an older wide receiver, a legendary wide receiver like Chad Johnson, with the Bengals being a player there, obviously one of their better ones in recent history, and I'm sure he's staying connected to the team, especially a wide receiver like Jamar Chase. This does hold some weight to me. Do I fully believe it's going to happen this week? That part I don't know, but if he's confident about it, I think this will end up being a positive case for the Bengals, but still, it's not the most reliable source to a lot of people, probably you could say, but it is some pretty big words to come from Chad Ochocinco, and also, that's not everything he said, but I'll get to those comments a little bit later on. After he said that, though, he said if no deal comes, he mentioned that Chase would be willing to go from holding in to holding out and won't touch the football field without a new deal if it doesn't come before the regular season, saying that he doesn't believe that a holdout would last long anyway. He does believe it'll happen, but he doesn't believe it'll be that long because he believes that at the end, the Cincinnati Bengals will cave and will give him that contract extension sooner rather than later. And again, why this is such a big problem, and also why necessarily it isn't something that the Bengals technically have to do. The problem lies with Jamar Chase, set to make about $4.6 million this year on the last year of his rookie contract, which is obviously criminal for a guy like Jamar Chase to be making less than $5 million per year. Rookie deal or not or anything like that, that can't happen. Jamar Chase shouldn't allow that to happen, obviously, because of how much he means to this team. But at the same time, the Bengals, again, the biggest thing around this is that they don't have to extend them because they still have next year on that fifth-year option deal if they decide to not get anything done this year. Jamar Chase is obligated contractually to be there and play, so it's not like Aiyuk, it's not like CeeDee Lamb where they're on the final year of their deal, so the teams feel pressured to get this done because they could end up losing them potentially. It's not that same case, and Chad alluded to that in the next statement where he said, CeeDee Lamb is doing the same thing, Brandon Aiyuk is doing the same thing. You have to let the owners know that you're able to separate the love for the game from the business like the owners do. And it's a good point that he brings up. I understand that point by Chad and bringing this up and holding out. I think that would really put more pressure on the Bengals, especially because you look at this Bengals team, and if it does actually turn into a holdout, which I don't believe it would at the end of the day, but, if it does end up getting to that point, you look at the Bengals team now, you have no more Tyler Boyd, you have no more Chris Evans from the running back spot, you lost Joe Mixon already as well, and T. Higgins is essentially on the last year on the team as well. But none of that really matters. You might look at T. Higgins and think, he's good enough to be a wide receiver one, obviously, but nothing matters really on that team. Nothing really negates the fact that Jamar Chase is just sitting on the sideline willingly, just not playing because you're reluctant to give him that contract extension. And it would put the Bengals in a very tough spot because, again, their owner has mentioned that he wants to get a deal done. He'll do to make a prediction on it. But that's where it is right now. He did, I don't get the sense that Chase would really hold out of the regular season. I feel like it just hasn't gone to that point maybe yet. Maybe that's the caveat in all of this, that he is holding off. He is still being respectful because he has confidence that they'll extend him, but maybe he's just being, being a good sport about it for right now because if they don't get it done, he is willing to get to that point. I haven't seen any indication that Jamar Chase is willing to take it that far, but again, you never truly know until, they actually decide to do it. But it is a worry, obviously, if you do get any sort of indication, any sort of hint that he is starting to lean that way, then this conversation changes, and obviously you can't afford to have Jamar Chase on the sideline. So where this all stands, if you believe Chad Johnson or anything like that, these are his words, obviously, playing the part of reporter on these statements. So, he did predict Russell Wilson would end up on the Steelers, so take that as you will. I hold it a little bit more heavy than I think most would, just because I think there is value in a former player talking to current players, especially at that same position, and how involved Chad Johnson is with everything. I think there is something there that he might know. For all we know, he might be talking to Ja'Marr Chase pretty regularly, obviously, if they're close like that. Again, I don't personally know that, but it seems like he has that good of a relationship with current players and especially players for the team that he used to play for. So it could be leading that way. There's a lot of unknowns with this because the biggest thing is that the Bengals don't need to do it, but how far is Ja'Marr Chase willing to take this into the regular season, potentially holding out if it gets to that point? We're just in a spot right now going out there and playing, and if he does that, has he missed a lot of training camp where he's not up to his best right when week 1 starts? That's another thing that you have to consider if Ja'Marr goes out there and plays, or maybe he just holds out. Maybe that's the hint. Maybe he hasn't been practicing. He's willing to sit out of week 1 because he knows he's not going to be ready anyway, so let's just hold out. All of that, are the factors to come into this situation. It's a very fascinating one because, again, it is early for when wide receivers or players would ask for that extension, but it makes sense with how hot the wide receiver market has been. Why wouldn't Ja'Marr Chase want to get in on this action sooner to guarantee his contract, his playing ability over the next few years? But we're going to touch on that a little bit more after this break, because when we come back, we're not only going to talk about Ja'Marr Chase, but also include Brandon Aiyuk and CeeDee Lamb, because those three are the biggest contract situations still left over. The clock is ticking on the start of the regular season, and these guys, I don't think anybody for sure knows who's going to get extended and who is not. So we're going to do a little bit of predicting the impact that their absences could have on their teams, and just going over the course of events that have happened over the past few months, and just talking about it and where we see these situations going. So that'll be coming up right after this break. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
We are now back quickly on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to continue on from our discussion in segment 1, now including the other wide receivers that still need a resolution found in their contract negotiations on top of Ja'Marr Chase. Now we're bringing in CeeDee Lamb and Brandon Aiyuk because there is less than 3 weeks left for the start of the regular season, and still there's really no solid evidence or any solid, reports or anything that we've heard so far that any resolution is coming for Brandon Aiyuk, CeeDee Lamb, or Ja'Marr Chase. Yeah, you might point out some recent reports by Schefter or Ian Rappaport or any of these guys, but again, I feel like it's more of the same so far with all the reports that we're hearing, and I don't know what to believe anymore, especially with this Brandon Aiyuk situation being, sort of closer to this, because I'm a Steelers fan, and is he going to get traded? It doesn't look like it one day, and then another day, the offer from the 49ers quite isn't there, what he expects, then it reignites the fire for the Steelers, and it's just been all a mess. And if I think that's a mess, you look at the situation with the Cowboys and CeeDee Lamb, and that one might be even more of a mystery to solve. And then Ja'Marr Chase as well, jumping in on that. But we're going to go through all three of these guys, go through the course of events that have happened over the last few weeks, and then just give our predictions on what's going to happen with each of these contract situations and when we could expect these solutions to come eventually, maybe eventually, or not at all. So we're going to start off with Brandon Aiyuk here, talking about Aiyuk because he's been holding in recently, and currently I feel like he's the one being talked about the most. It seems like every other day, like I mentioned, there's always something about being close to the Niners. He's not quite there yet. He doesn't like their offer too much. Maybe he's thinking of a trade. A lot has been said about Brandon Aiyuk recently. It's pretty much down to being traded to the Steelers or re-signing, extending with the 49ers. And contract talks have been going on all off season, and reports say that they were close at one point before the influx of other deals came in for other wide receivers, obviously just shooting up the price. And then Brandon Aiyuk, before signing, apparently, he took a step back, reevaluated everything, and thought he could get more money now because the market had just exploded out of nowhere with deals to like 10 different receivers in a span of like a couple of months. So, it is smart by Brandon Aiyuk. It's beneficial for him, obviously, to do this, to get more money out of it, especially coming off of the year that he did. He has a lot of leverage in this situation, obviously, with how the trade talks have also broken down. He has requested a trade, unlike the other two wide receivers, so that, again, gives them a bit more leverage. He shot down the trade offer from the Patriots. They were willing to give him a lot of money, and it seemed like they had a trade down with the 49ers. Same thing with the Browns. It seemed like they had a contract for Brandon Aiyuk and a trade suitable for the 49ers. But again, Brandon Aiyuk and that power to be willing to accept that contract and get things moving, he declined that as well. So there is only two options now, like I said, Steelers or staying on the 49ers. And there's a lot of uncertainty, obviously, with the different reports. And also, Brandon Aiyuk, I think, has been the most active of the three, posting cryptic messages, not showing up to voluntary workouts, and then showing up to training camp and not participating in practice. He's been on podcasts talking about it and things like that. So you don't really know what he's thinking, quite honestly. You don't know when, where, or what's going to be the deciding factor with all of this. And one thing that I will point out, one of the reports that I feel like could hold a little bit more weight comes from Adam Schefter, that he said that this week could be critical because the 49ers are getting to a point where they want to get this resolved. They're tired of just putting this off, waiting for Brandon Aiyuk to make a decision. They've offered him another contract that they think is more suitable, more appropriate to his worth. So they want to find a resolution sooner rather than later to at least move on and know who is going to be available to them. So I guess we'll just keep an eye out for that. Hopefully it happens no later than this weekend, because we move into next week and then there's only about 15 days before the season kicks off. So that needs to be resolved. And then moving on to another receiver, CeeDee Lamb. He's in a full holdout as of right now. And Brandon Aiyuk had a great year last year, but CeeDee Lamb had one of the best receiving seasons last year in Cowboys franchise history. So right away, that gives him a lot of leverage. He's putting up numbers up there with some of the best receivers that the Cowboys have ever had. And the fact that he broke some records, set some franchise records, it's hard to not give that contract to that guy that had one of the best seasons ever in your franchise's history. But like I said, they're dealing with a full holdout. He hasn't been present at all throughout the entire offseason. So not at voluntary workouts, not at training camp at all, not even just showing up. He's just not been there. And unlike Brandon Aiyuk as well, we haven't heard much from CeeDee Lamb at all. They brought it up to him at one of his camps, but again, he just shot it down, saying that he's not going to talk about it. He's only going to take questions about the kids at his football camp. So he's been kept pretty quiet about it. He's kept to himself and just waiting for things to play out as they should. It feels like he believes that he's done enough, that he doesn't need to talk, because he arguably was one of the best receivers, if not the best receiver last year in the NFL. And a lot of their success was predicated on how he performed. And you want to look at Dak and the situation that they have dealing with his contract extension as well. You could look at Dak in the season that he had. Maybe you argue that they should get him done first. But CeeDee could make a great argument that Dak wouldn't have had that season without, CeeDee performing to that level. So it's funny because Dak could say the same thing. CeeDee's not having that type of season if I'm not his quarterback. So that symbiotic relationship is another thing that makes this entire situation for the Dallas Cowboys that much more difficult. And really deciding who you want to extend, because I truly don't believe now that with less than 3 weeks to go to the season that they're going to get both of them done. I feel like they're going to have to choose, because you're asking for 2 contracts at top of the market value, and the fact that it's still in a period where the Cowboys are like, yeah, we're optimistic about it. CeeDee's not saying anything. Dak also is saying they're in a good spot right now, but talks are continuing to go on, and reports contradicting that, saying that they're not really close at all. I don't think there's enough time to get to a point where both sides are happy in both contract negotiations. So to me, it seems like they're going to have to pick, and I really believe that they're going to go with CeeDee, but I'm going to hold off on why in just a few seconds. After I just go through Ja'Marr Chase's situation just briefly, after I just went over it in the first segment, he has 2 years left. Cincinnati, again, don't have to trade him, or don't have to extend him, I should say. They're not going to trade him. But he has 2 years left on his contract overall, unlike Brandon and unlike CeeDee Lamb. They're on their last year of their deal. Zach Taylor been kept pretty quiet about what is going on with Ja'Marr Chase, what he feels are Ja'Marr Chase's feelings, whether or not he believes he's going to hold in or hold out. That's another layer of this that has been added on, like I mentioned, from Chad Ochocinco, that could this hold-in be turned into a holdout once the regular season starts? That would be worst-case scenario, obviously, for the Bengals. And it's just in a weird spot because he is supposed to make very little money for the type of receiver that he is, and he still has that fifth-year option. So really, the Bengals don't feel a deadline right now to get it done because he is under contract to be on that team. And I don't think they're finding him right now because he is there, obviously, but once the regular season starts, maybe once they start finding him, if he does hold out, they probably feel confident that he'll show up and he'll actually play. But that's still a couple weeks away. We don't know. And that's the scary part about it. You just don't know where Ja'Marr Chase's head is at right now in regards to what he's actually going to do. So in terms of my predictions, what I think is ultimately going to happen with each of these guys, in terms of solutions and what actually is going to happen, I think the Cowboys will decide to go with CeeDee Lamb and give him a new deal, but not Dak. At least I think it's more likely that CeeDee gets a contract before the start of the regular season than Dak does before the start of the regular season. Just because CeeDee Lamb's not been there. He's not there at all. There's a difference between working out on your own, staying in shape, and then being in football shape, right? Being in training camp, having a helmet on all day, having those pads on every other day in practice. He could be doing a fantastic job of staying in shape, but again, it's not enough for me to believe that he's going to be in football shape once he comes back right up against the deadline of the regular season. That's why I believe they're going to prioritize CeeDee Lamb a little bit more. I think he'll be the first one to get it done. And then with Dak, the way that he has approached this, it seems like he is content with moving on from the Cowboys. They might not be okay with that, but Dak's not making a big deal about it, and CeeDee Lamb, more so than not, is making more of a big deal about it than Dak. So I feel like you have to address the guy that isn't even in the building before you address the quarterback, which seems backwards, obviously, because Dak is the quarterback, and he did play a great year last year, but to me it seems like CeeDee right now seems to be a little bit more of the priority because he just isn't there, and you need him very much there to even have a chance. If they don't have him there, it seems like he's the most willing to hold out. And even if you do extend Dak and CeeDee's not there, you're not going to win many games. Honestly, that's the truth. If you don't have CeeDee Lamb there, I can't name another receiver for the Cowboys other than Jalen Tolbert and Brandon Cooks, and those guys are not number one receivers. So that's why I feel CeeDee will get a deal first before Dak. And then you look at Ja'Marr Chase. I feel like he'll play in the regular season. I don't really buy that he'll hold out, just because I think it has to do a lot with the money. Yeah, he's supposed to be paid very little this upcoming 2024 year, but that's why I sort of believe he's going to show up just for the regular season, right, if that makes sense. There's no sense in practicing this offseason if you know that you're just going to make very little money anyway during the regular season. So to me, I feel like he's going to show up. He might be a little bit angry about it, a little bit, just whiny about it, just making a fuss about it, not being happy, not giving good answers in the media. But I feel like he's going to show up, be upset about it, for a lack of better terms, just acting like childish in a way. But he'll show up because I believe next year when he plays on that 5th-year option, he's going to get closer to market price. And that way you could have him there for training camp because he will be making more money, more guaranteed money in that 5th year. So Jamar, I don't think is going to hold out. I don't really buy too much into that. And then lastly, Brandon Aiyuk. I feel like Brandon's going to get traded. I feel like Brandon would get traded because I don't see this really coming to any terms anytime soon. I feel like these reports of him having a meeting again on Monday with the 49ers, getting closer to an extension, I feel like I've heard that at least twice or 3 times already. So the fact that now we are cutting it close to the start of the regular season, they have a big game in the first week against the New York Jets, and the fact that, again, he might not be in football shape right away, you have to get all your eggs in order, or all your ducks in order. I think that's the saying, but regardless, you have to get everything in order before you start game planning to that game against the New York Jets, receiving them in San Francisco. It's going to be a big game, so you need to know who you have available, and if you keep dragging this on, I feel like the 49ers are getting closer to a point where they just are over it to an extent, and I feel like they'd reduce the asking price and just feel like getting over this is worth more than trying to beg and insist Brandon Aiyuk to just take the contract if he really doesn't want to take it again, right? It seems like he wants to be paid accordingly. So he does hold a lot of power, but at the same time, he is contractually obligated to be there. But again, I feel like he would hold out, and that really does no good to the 49ers at all. So I believe that they'll cave, trade him, just because they have bigger goals set out for 2024. They can't have this situation in their mind, clogging up their mind, because they're trying to win a Super Bowl. And if you have players who win a Super Bowl, a lot of pressure on Kyle Shanahan as well. So those are my predictions on how these situations will end up for each receiver. Leave your guys' thoughts on whether you agree with me or whether or not you think I was wrong with one of my predictions. Leave your guys' comments using the Super Chat feature, of course, in today's show. But regardless of that, we're going to move on to our next topic, a pretty open discussion that we're going to have on some comments Tom Brady made about the rookie quarterbacks being ill-prepared compared to past years when he was a quarterback, and also legendary coach Bill Parcells also touching on this situation in a different sort of way, approaching it from a mental side of things for rookie quarterbacks. I'll get into all the details on what those two guys said after this break. We'll be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back to the show. After taking a break now from all the wide receiver talk, we're going to get into more of an open discussion about some of the rookie quarterbacks today and also in the past, and how they compare a little bit in terms of being ready for the moment, being prepared to go out there and lead from such a young age, from such an inexperienced position, and having success off of that. Because already we know that Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, and apparently after news broke today, Bo Nix are going to start as rookie quarterbacks in week 1. And we could also even see Drake May potentially start for the Patriots. So at most, we could see 3 to 4 quarterbacks starting in week 1. And while we've been very impressed by them. We've seen them perform in preseason games against, adult men making a living out off of playing football. It's exciting to see them go out there and perform, be very efficient, be very exciting, creating some magic out of nowhere also. And not only is it exciting for the fans and everything like that, but also for the organization. It shows that, you did a good job. They give themselves a pat on the back, saying that we drafted our guy, we found our franchise guy. And while all that might be true, a lot of things that come with the evaluation of quarterbacks, and not only bringing in the right guy, but also through this period of workouts, training camp, and everything like that, if he has a chance to start, I feel like people don't really take into account the mental and the psychological part of such a young player, and not just any player, the face of your franchise, the quarterback, the most important position on the field. Not a lot of people take into account how ready they are mentally when they are deciding to make this decision of starting a 24, 22, 21-year-old quarterback coming off of a college season. And in this discussion, there was Bill Parcells who made a comment on this, and also Tom Brady speaking over the weekend on the level of preparedness that these rookie quarterbacks, are forced almost to start in the NFL by lacking that command, that control. But before we get into what Tom Brady said, I thought Bill Parcells made a good point about this earlier on this week when he mentioned it, and talking about starting rookie quarterbacks from his point of view, obviously being one of the greater ones that we've seen in recent history in terms of head coaches. He spoke on the Boston Globe recently in regards to the hype around Drake May and starting rookie quarterbacks just in general. He said, fans never consider the psychological makeup of the player you're getting ready to throw to the wolves. What you really have to judge is the timing and the chance to succeed. Sometimes, if they don't succeed, it destroys them. And he goes on afterwards to say, fans will say, well, if he can't take it, we don't want him anyway. But when this is a high draft choice, you've got to do everything in your power to allow him to have a chance to succeed. And to me, that resonated pretty resoundingly, just because, again, it speaks a lot to the fact that, a lot of times you're looking at the physical makeup, how, exciting they are when they take off for a 20-yard run, they escape a sack, they escape another one, and then they just chuck it down the field, they make a good throw on the sideline and things like that. It all looks great, like they've done this a million times, like it's almost too easy for them in a sense, but when you see it, the context of it matters. Playing in preseason is obviously not playing like it is in the regular season. And once you get to the regular season, every week counts pretty much, just because it's not like an NBA season, obviously, or an MLB season where you're playing multiple games a week. You can drop one here, you can drop a couple in a week, and you're still considered one of the best teams in that respective sport. You have to almost win as many games as possible to give yourself a chance in each conference, because now, more so than not, I think ever, honestly, the competition within each conference is very high, and it seems like almost a bunch of the teams, it almost seems like there's 4 or 5 teams at least in each conference that has an elite level quarterback, and there's only 7 spots in the playoffs. So starting a rookie and believing that they're able to carry that pressure right away, right after making the transition, or I shouldn't even say making the transition, trying to make that transition over from college to the NFL. It's a lot. It's a lot, not only dealing with the physical side of it, obviously, week to week, being that guy expecting to perform, but also the mental side of not performing well one day, making a bad throw, making a bad read, and knowing that afterwards the media is going to kill you, maybe the fans start to turn on you, and that's where I think Bill Parcells is sort of coming from that state, and something that he obviously took into account when he was the head coach. And similarly, when I recently saw Tom Brady speak at Fanatics Fest over the weekend on a edition of the Stephen A. Smith Show, he spoke in an interview with him and talked about one thing that he really didn't like in regards to rookie quarterbacks. And I also have that statement. He said during Fanatics Fest that I think it's just a tragedy that we're forcing these rookies to play early, but the reality is the only reason why they are is because we've dumbed the game down, which has allowed them to play. And afterwards, he added that quarterbacks don't have the same expertise, don't have the same command and control of an offense coming in when they are ready to start in comparison to now, where they are just forced to start and they don't really know too well what to do out there when things go bad. He mentioned a good example of seeing sometimes how rookies are out there, and he related it back to himself when he mentioned that sometimes he would get a play call that they've worked on all week, and he'd get it, he'd think, great, we got this play, and he'd look at the defense and think, wow, this play's going to work, this is perfect, let's snap the ball. But in other instances, when he was a young player in the league, after developing so many years as the backup, even going to college as well, bringing that level of expertise to him, when he did get a chance to start, if the call that came in wasn't going to work against that set defense, he was able to audible change it and snap that ball knowing that that play was going to work. Nowadays, he alluded to the fact that quarterbacks now, because they don't have that same control, because they're not really prepped, they're not really developed from college into the NFL, that they just snap the ball anyway, and they are just accepting of the fact that the play's not going to work. They're going to try to make it work, but a lot of times it leads to a lot of mistakes, and then that way they make that mistake or the play just blows up and they look like the bad guy. They look like they don't know what they're doing. They look like they've made the wrong read, and that way, not a lot of fans take into account that, they're just not mentally there to make that play. They don't have the mental experience. They don't have the mental reps to say, this defense is lined up like this, I'm going to audible to this play and make sure everyone's in line this way, rather than just calling the play anyway because that's what the coach thinks is going to work. And from that point on, both of those statements kind of reminded me of what we talked about yesterday with Tua Tagovailoa and the comments that he made with Brian Flores, and just that physical aspect of rookies and how Bill Parcells put it, almost like when you have a young guy like Tua coming in, a guy that you're supposed to invest in highly because they drafted him at number 5, with that psychological part of the game already being a question, nobody knows how Tua's approaching this situation of eventually maybe getting the chance to start. He's still trying to learn everything that comes into being the starting quarterback, being a quarterback in general in the NFL. He's still trying to get that all in line. And then after years of this going on, you hear how Brian Flores was almost talking down on him, saying that you shouldn't be here, this other guy should be here, you haven't earned this, and that destroys their mental side of it, obviously. And not only that, but like Bill Parcells said, I'll pull it up again, one of the biggest things he says is that sometimes if they don't succeed, it destroys them. And I feel like that was almost what happened to Tua in that situation with Brian Flores. And not to just specify to this situation, but it just brought it up to me because I talked about it yesterday. The fact that you threw him to the Wolves halfway through the year, and he might have been super nervous, super unprepared to take that role right away. You just felt pressure to throw him out there because he was a first-round pick. Then not only that, not only are you allegedly talking down on him and making him less confident in himself, then you go ahead and bench him not once, but twice for Ryan Fitzpatrick. And in that mind, people think that, oh, Tua's a bust. Tua just got benched twice. He has no capabilities, no skill of being the starting quarterback, where in reality, people don't think about the mental side on how being benched twice is pretty embarrassing for being a first-round pick and being a top 5 pick on top of that, and having all the success that you had at Alabama, to have that embarrassment happen to you on the field, but also having Brian Flores talk to you in that way, all of that, is bundled up into what you see on the field sometimes, and people just think it's a lack of skill or it's a lack of ability, where they don't take into account this other side of it, which I think is important. And also, just talking more so on what Tom Brady said, they're not truly ready to start in a lot of situations because of that lack of command, the lack of years preparing for a situation where they've had to audible, they've had to change the play. A lot of times, especially in college, you're starting to see the transition from it where players are just starting to hop from team to team, and they're not really learning, or they're not really developing, earning their spots on these teams. And it, like he said, it's almost dumbing the game down where they spend a year here, they spend a year there, and they don't really learn too much about an offense or being comfortable enough with it to audible and make all these adjustments. By the time they enter the draft and they, get drafted to any team, they are expected to do that at this highest level because that's what defenses sometimes force you to do, and they struggle with that. So it almost goes hand in hand with the psychological part of it, not being prepared, and getting bundled up into how this could all go wrong. Because what the funny thing about coaches and the level of engaging the level of preparedness for these young rookie quarterbacks, I know there's obviously a lot of pressure to start them. It almost feels like someone's breathing on the back of your neck because you have all this pressure to start this highly drafted rookie, and you feel like you need to start them. Maybe that's what Brian Flores was feeling at the time, but at the same time, if they're not ready, and at the same time you don't gauge the mental side of it, how prepared they really are in mastering that offense, what ends up happening at the end of the day is that coach ends up being fired, and then you're looked upon as the bad guy in the entire situation. You end up losing your job, and then unideally you get a situation like Tua. If you're Brian Flores, he stays, you get fired, and a couple years from now Tua is one of the best quarterbacks, or was one of the best quarterbacks just last year, and that doesn't look good on you as well. It shows a lack of evaluation in rookie quarterbacks and things like that. And I think I would agree with Tom Brady in saying that more so than not, quarterbacks nowadays are more unprepared, and it is harder to see and gauge which quarterbacks are ready to start. And that's why I started this off with mentioning how we could have 4 quarterbacks starting, because it is a lot and it is exciting, but the level and the idea that they are all ready to start right now, it's highly unlikely that all of them are at this high level of knowing the offense perfectly, knowing how to audible out of plays, and the mental side that comes with it as well. You don't truly know how they're going to react to that. So yeah, a lot of them are starting, but I just worry that maybe it could be a little bit too quick for some of them. I would have loved to seen Jacoby Brissett play. I mean, that one's not subtle, but I would like Jacoby to start. Ideally, I would have liked Jarrett Stidham to start. And it was different for Caleb and Jaden just because they were drafted so highly. They almost always start when you're drafted that high as well. So that's really all of this that I kind of wanted to open up with, and open this segment up on the mental side of it, the unpreparedness. It all goes hand in hand, and these 2 quotes are pretty important, I thought, pretty significant in really highlighting these factors, and it has to do with the quarterbacks that we're going to see just in 2024, how they deal with this, and almost like a warning, I guess I am providing, that if they do struggle, sometimes it's just not the fact that they're not capable of doing it, they don't have the skill. Sometimes it's the mental side of things that a lot of people don't pick out. So just as a warning, I guess, to kind of consider that if a lot of them, all of them, one of them starts to struggle in 2024. But that's all pretty much I wanted to say on that topic, and we have a couple more to get to on today's show. Staying on the topic of quarterbacks, Brock Purdy, highlighting the fact that he played this past weekend in the preseason, which I'm a fan of, but the way that he did it and who he played with raised a lot of questions in the media, so we're going to highlight that. And also, in the last segment, we're going to go through some potential changes still coming to the new kickoff format before the start of the regular season. So stay tuned to that. We'll be right back after this break.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows. Available everywhere podcasts are found.
Back here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, and now talking some more about a different quarterback in this regard. Not a rookie quarterback, but someone that was drafted very late in a couple years ago, in the draft a couple years ago, that being Brock Purdy. Now obviously turning into this superstar quarterback to some. There are some that still doubt him, but I am a believer in Brock. I think he is better than a lot of people give him credit, but because I hold him so high, I feel like he should be treated like a starting high-caliber quarterback, right? And what happened over the weekend wouldn't happen to any other elite high-caliber quarterback, which, raised a lot of questions and sent some criticism over to Kyle Shanahan as well from some people, because Brock Purdy got his first action of the preseason on Sunday versus the Saints, and he didn't play too much. He only played 3 series in San Francisco's win over the Saints. About 11 snaps. He went 2 for 6 with 11 yards. It's not impressive too much. It is the preseason. He only played 3 series, so take those numbers as you will. It almost just felt like he was just out there to get the body moving a little bit, right? I don't have a problem with it. I'd like to see quarterbacks play in the preseason, but the way that it was set up for Brock was a little bit questionable, or very questionable actually, because the weird part about this is that Brock Purdy played all 3 of those series with second and third string players from the 49ers, and already that seems backwards and that seems wrong in every sense of the matter, just because you do acknowledge the fact that you struck gold finding Brock Purdy, and the fact that he is this great. That's awesome for the 49ers, to get him that late and be your franchise quarterback. That's awesome. But you gotta protect that guy. You gotta treat him accordingly. And I'm not saying that the draft spot really influences at all, but you gotta value it a little bit more. I feel like you gotta value Brock some more, because to put him out there with second and third stringers is just calling for something to go wrong, where it could have been easily avoided by playing all the starters and all the starting offensive line. Yeah, Trent Williams might not be there. That's the case. I know Christian McCaffrey's hurt, but a bunch of those guys could have played, but they didn't. And the fact that you threw them out there with second and third stringers is just backwards, and it shouldn't have happened, really. And Kyle Shanahan had a statement to say after the game, sort of explaining why, but also just giving his thoughts on his sentiment on why, this happened, why he decided to play Brock Purdy out there. He said, "Just thought it'd be good for him to get a couple of drives in. We were hoping it would be one long drive just to get him out, similar to what Brandon Allen had last week, but we had, I think it was 2 3-and-outs, so I didn't want to go past that." And after that statement, he said it felt good with the guys that we had in there. So, not really explaining too much why he was out there with the second and third stringers, but again, it seems like this was just coming from a spot that, like I said before, that he just wanted to get Brock Purdy out there, give him some action, and just get his feet wet a little bit in the preseason, which this is all right with me. If a coach decides only one game, that's his decision, but I want to see them out there at least for a couple of drives at least. I don't like really how Kirk Cousins isn't playing. Aaron Rodgers probably isn't going to play. Josh Allen really hasn't played. Also, I'm sure I'm missing a couple, but those guys really, I would have liked to have seen him play a drive, 2 drives, a quarter, even a half for some of these guys in one game or multiple games. I feel like that really helps in getting everything moving and really highlighting a lot of the times what you don't do right. It is a common thing, in the preseason. It does highlight what you need to do better, but again, you take it with a grain of salt because it's only the preseason. I'm a big proponent of that. Not to take it too seriously, but you do get to see different looks, different defenses, different just experience than you would in practice. So that's why I believe it's always good to get your starters out there, but the context of it matters, where you can't have your quarterback, especially the quarterback. If you have a receiver out there, maybe you throw him in there with the backup quarterback, or with the backup offensive lineman, that doesn't matter. But your quarterback, to have him out there with backup offensive line, backup receivers, and things like that, it really doesn't make too much sense. And Brock Purdy actually echoed the same willingness to play, to go out there, that Kyle Shanahan kind of mentioned. He said he wanted to be out there when they asked him. They actually approached him to see if he wanted to play, and he said that he would. He added, honestly, it's those things that I liked. Just the idea of playing in a preseason game to feel again before the season gets here and everything. It's good reps for me. It's a good feeling for me as a quarterback, so I didn't mind it. I don't think he was ever going to say that he shouldn't be out there with second stringers. He was obviously never going to say that, but he's also echoing the same thing. To be out there is great. Get a feel for it. See some of your deficiencies before the season actually starts is a good thing. That's why when I'm seeing everybody kill Russell Wilson, kill the Steelers offense for how bad they're performing, at least it's not the regular season, right? At least you're not carrying this into week 1, week 2, and then that's when it is a problem. But again, there is context that comes with it. You ask Brock Purdy if he wants to be out there. He says yes, so yeah, the other starters might not want to play out there. Maybe they didn't think they were going to play. But if your quarterback is going out there, you almost have to make those guys go out there, even if they don't want to, even if they didn't know they were going to play. The quarterback's going out there, so at least all you offensive linemen are going out there. That's the least you could do for your starting quarterback. And maybe they didn't want to go out there. Maybe that wasn't the plan, like I said before. But Brock, being a leader, being a big voice in that locker room, if he said he wants to play, and then maybe if he approached his teammates, they would have, I think, backed him up on that. They would have agreed that they could all go out there, because they also know, all those players, all those starters know that if Brock Purdy's out there and he gets hurt, this season for the 49ers is almost as good as, not completely done, but it's not the same expectation, obviously, because you saw what happened when he didn't play in the NFC Championship game against the Eagles. If you injure him like this for a silly decision like this, not only do you lose him and your team, the expectations drop, but it looks bad on Kyle Shanahan, who is under a lot of pressure already to win a Super Bowl, and then you get Brock Purdy hurt doing something like this. It looks bad. It looks relatively amateur in a way, but also it shows a lot of the trust that Kyle Shanahan has in Brock Purdy to go out there and not get hurt. So I guess you could chalk that up as a positive. But again, it was just a weird decision. Even on the NFL Network, they had Brian Baldinger mention how some of these wide receivers were stepping out of bounds. The left tackle and the right tackle weren't blocking. There was a play where Chase Young broke through the line and he was chasing Brock Purdy very early on in that game, and that probably had a lot of fans, had their hearts drop in that moment where you see Brock Purdy being chased down like that, and the last thing you want to do is see him get hit or driven into the ground, and that way the whole air in that stadium leaves in just an instant when he hits the ground hard. He's slow to get up or anything like that. I feel like this could have easily been avoided, especially because after this game, Kyle Shanahan said that Brock Purdy will be playing in their third preseason game at the Las Vegas Raiders, but this time, obviously, all or most of the starters will be out there with him. But I don't know. It felt like that was the original plan, and almost like, if I were to guess, that they asked Brock if he wanted to play with the idea, the intention that they weren't going to play any starters, but because Brock said yes, they figured, all right, let's just throw him out there for one long drive, like Kyle Shanahan said. It didn't go to plan, so they had him out there for 3 drives, and yeah, it is risky. It shows the trust that Shanahan has in Brock, but I feel like this wasn't supposed to happen like this. It feels like they were only supposed to play the third preseason game, but because of who Brock is, wanting to be out there and get those reps in, they had to change it up a little bit. It did cause all this stir in the media, which isn't great, but I guess in hindsight, looking at it now, nothing really happened. Brock's all right, but you can't you can't mess around like this. Obviously, if you're the 49ers and you have your franchise quarterback out there, we got to be a little bit smarter with this. I'm sure some 49ers fans weren't happy, but at the end of the day, luckily nothing happened to Brock Purdy, and we can move on to next week, the final week of the preseason. But we're also going to move on this show. We have one more segment to talk about in regards to the new kickoff rules, some still potential changes coming to the format. I'll provide you guys with some quotes on what the state of those changes are at this point in time, and just some questions I still have with the new kickoff format as well. So stick around. We'll be right back quickly to talk about some changes coming to potentially the new kickoff format. Thank you for joining me here on the last segment of today's show, going over some quick changes that could come to the new kickoff format in 2024. So far, I think so good for the new format, as it has produced more kickoffs actually being returned out of, the end zone or just out of the landing zone, because just in the preseason, we've had 78% of the kickoffs getting returned in comparison to last year, where 63% of the kickoffs were returned in the preseason. So obviously there's a difference between the preseason and the regular season, but initially you're seeing what you wanted out of this new kickoff format, right? And the average starting spot so far has been about that 28-yard line, which seems like a decent spot to start, not too much in an advantage for the return team, and also not such a big advantage for the kickoff team that, offenses are starting from the 25 and the 20-yard line. It seems like a good median so far on that, but it is good, but still there are some concerns when we do get to the regular season that these touchbacks and the willingness for kickoff teams to just kick it out of the back of the end zone will increase because of the fact that the average starting spot is the 28-yard line already. So we talked about this with Sean Payton, weeks ago now, where he was one of the first coaches to bring it up, and basically saying that with this new format, with these new rules, obviously, yeah, it's great with the touchback and wanting to at least make it more of an incentive to do it, but if teams are getting to the 30-yard line anyway, that's the average starting spot, like I mentioned before, he feels like there would be a reluctance from teams kicking off in the regular season, that what's the point in kicking off if they're just going to get to the 30-yard line anyway? Let's kick it through the end zone and let's have it start at the 30 anyway. So that is obviously going to be a problem that pretty much completely negates the fact or the idea that you had with this new kickoff rule, trying to make more people kick it off. If they're just still going to kick it into the back of the end zone, there really is no point. So that's a big issue with it. That's why Sean Payton sort of proposed the idea to have the touchback rule, to have the touchback move up to the 35-yard line instead of the 30, because that way, like I agree, most teams will not want to give up a starting spot at the 35-yard line. That's basically almost starting at the 40 if you kick it out of bounds or have a penalty or something like that. So you don't want to give up that much starting position, and I feel like the NFL should change it to that, but it doesn't feel like they're too eager to do it, because the NFL chief football administrative officer, Dawn Aponte, was asked about the possibility of making this change, moving to the 35-yard line instead of the 30-yard line, and she didn't rule it out, but she didn't seem too worried about teams being reluctant to kick it into the landing zone and rather decide to just get a touchback anyway. She said it would not be likely. The way that we passed this and discussed it with the competition committee as well as membership at large was really about continuing to evaluate it as a one-year rule change. So we anticipate to evaluate this throughout the season. So I think you can take a few things from that. The fact that she said that it's a 1 year sort of thing with this rule change. It's a 1 year sort of evaluation. Yeah, they're gonna monitor it. Yeah, they're gonna keep track of it during the regular season. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're gonna be willing to make changes once the regular season starts, right? Because Aponte also suggested that they'll continue to monitor this throughout the preseason, but they could still make some minor changes before the regular season, and that could be to other things about it. She said they already made it illegal, for kickers to put the ball sideways when they're trying to, get that kick away. They're not allowed to put it sideways, but also they are allowed a 12th man on the field whenever there's inclement weather or things like that. They are allowed to have a 12th man on the field. They've allowed that to happen. Those are some changes that already have been made. So, yeah, they've made some changes, but they don't seem likely to come with when things get tough, when things start to tighten up, especially in the playoffs or something like that. You can't give up starting position, or you can't run the risk of thinking that a touchback is not going to be the best situation for you. You decide to just kick it out of the back of the end zone. That way, there's absolutely no chance the team returning that kick is not going to return it to the 40 of your side of the field, or get it over half field as well. So to completely erase that, just kick it out of the back of the end zone. I feel like it might not happen during the regular season where they're going to evaluate it, but once we get to the playoffs where it really matters most, I fear that teams, kickoff units are just going to resort back to their old ways, and that's not what you want to see. That's not what the NFL wants to see, obviously. In the biggest, most important portion of the year, they don't want to see touchbacks just come back anyway. They want to see this new format out there. They want to see it put into effect, and that's why I'm a little bit puzzled why they wouldn't move it. I get that you don't want to give too much an advantage to the return team, but at the same time, if everything that you've worked for basically can just be wiped out like that by teams just deciding to kick it for a touchback anyway, it seems like it's almost worth it to just make this change. But that's just me. I'm a fan of moving it back to the 35, but I don't really know if they're going to be willing to do that at this point in time. I feel like they just want to see how it plays out before they really make that change. And it's weird because initially that was going to be the rule. That was going to be the rule to have it start at the 35 if you kick it through the back of the end zone. But the last moment they got together and they changed it to the 30. So a little bit ironic how it works, but that's what they decided to go with. And also it seems like the regular season is a little bit off limits, like I alluded to before, to making any sort of changes. They said they're going to evaluate some of the changes that they could make in the regular season, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to change it, because if you're making changes, it's one thing to do it in the preseason, right, where these games don't really matter, the outcomes don't really matter. But if you try to make changes during the regular season, that's when you're going to get more of an uproar, more of just criticism towards the NFL for changing the rules once the games actually start, and then there's more confusion, and then there's more of just an uproar on whether or not they're supposed to do this, they're supposed to do that. You change it 1 week, and now nobody really knows what they're doing for a very new sort of kickoff rule, and that's the last thing you want to do, is make a whole big mess about this once the regular season starts. So it seems like the regular season is going to be the deadline to actually making changes, so they got to get anything in there that they really want to before the regular season starts. And just lastly here, there was an interesting point brought up before. I think I saw it on somewhere on just national media, I think it might have been the Pat McAfee show, but regardless of that, with the starting spot, the way the new rule works, teams, nobody's allowed to move until the returners pick it up and start running with the ball. So the question that comes up from that is, how are you supposed to tell when the kicker, or when the returner, picks it up? Because when you're defending, you want to get a good jump, right? Obviously, you want to get in good position to make the tackle to avoid a huge return, right? But if you're sort of like looking over, trying to look through guys, and you don't really know when the returner picks up the ball, it could lead to some more false starts or offsides, however they call it, and it gets a little bit sloppy, and then that way you still don't have a return at the end of the day. More so, the kickoff team is more at a disadvantage if that happens to be the case. So it was brought up that maybe a second whistle could be blown to sort of signal the start of the play. You blow the whistle once the returner actually picks up the ball, and that way you avoid any sort of confusion on whether or not he has the ball. You avoid constant penalties that you could see by someone just jumping ahead of time. So that was another thing that I found interesting with this rule. Maybe they consider that, but then if you have another whistle, does it become too confusing by having two whistles? There's a lot of positives and negatives to take from that. So it's something to think about. There's only one more week left, so any sort of things they want to iron out is going to come after this upcoming weekend and in preparation to the start of the regular season. So hopefully they make the necessary changes to make this play as successful as possible, because I'm a fan of it. I don't want it to become a thing every week where everyone's starting to complain about it. I think this could be a good thing. It's just a matter of the NFL getting it right and making it the most efficient as it can be. But we'll see. We'll see where they take it. But that'll be it for today's show. That'll conclude today's episode of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. Please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the show, as well as following the network on all forms of social media. If you want to see more of this show, check out both of those channels for more content around the NFL as well in a variety of different ways. And lastly, tune in every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time for more discussions and the hottest headlines around the NFL with me, Manny Maradiaga, as your host. Thanking you for joining me today, and also I hope to see you guys back here joining me again tomorrow.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.